Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the role of the United Nations General Assembly? Why is it called the Town Hall of the World, where 193 countries come together to deal with problems such as climate change, migration, nuclear proliferation, and many others? My guest today is going to bring us up to date on this very interesting organ of the United Nations. My guest today is Mr. Brenden Varma. Mr. Brenden Varma serves as spokesperson for the president of the 72nd session of the UN General Assembly. He's in charge of communications, outreach, and media relations. Before joining the United Nations, he worked for ABC News in New York and the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C. Brenden Varma, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill.
Appreciate you being with me today. I mentioned the General Assembly. There are 6 organs of the UN. The 2 that are the most powerful are the Security Council, obviously, the 15-member Security Council, and the 193 members in the UN General Assembly. What is the role of the General Assembly?
The General Assembly is a really unique organ in the UN because it's the only one where all 193 member states sit, and they all are equal in terms of whether or not they're big or small or poor or rich or powerful or not powerful. They all get one vote. They all get one seat. So it's a very special place. It's a very democratic organ of the UN, and they tackle a wide range of subjects that affect people throughout the world, including some of the ones that you mentioned, climate change, sustainable development, a large range of topics, including in addition to disarmament, they also cover legal issues. They cover topics that affect people throughout the world. And it's interesting to note that a lot of times in Model United Nations, when kids emulate the UN, they're usually emulating the General Assembly because it's the most famous organ. It's where all the countries sit.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the most popular programs in the U.S. and around the world. Mm-hmm. The Model UN program, where children, or not just children, even adults have it in universities, and they come in and they pretend like they're the mission. They're part of the delegation from Lithuania, or they're the delegation from Ecuador, or wherever it might be, and actually see how the United Nations operates. They draft resolutions. It's a remarkable program.
Yes, yes. It's a great way for people to learn about this organization.
It certainly is, yes. Now, the General Assembly passes resolutions, but they are non-binding as opposed to the Security Council, which deals with peace and security, but their resolutions are binding on the parties. But that is the distinction, right? Right.
The General Assembly's resolutions are not binding, but they're very important reflections of political will. Through them, you can tell what the countries of the world are thinking.
Exactly. That's very important. That's very, very important. Well, let's talk about your boss, Miroslav Lajcak?
Yes.
And who is Miroslav Lajcak as 72nd President of the General Assembly?
So Miroslav Lajcak, he's in addition to being the President of the United Nations General Assembly, he's also the Foreign Minister of Slovakia. And he's interesting. He started his career at a very early age. So at the age of 31, he was actually Slovakia's ambassador in Japan, making him Slovakia's youngest ambassador ever and the youngest ambassador to ever serve in Japan. His birthday happens to fall on the International Day of Happiness, which is an interesting fact. Yeah. He's held a number of national and regional and international portfolios, including as the International High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So he comes to the UN with a lot of great experience, and he's been using that to further the goals of the General Assembly.
Being a 31-year-old ambassador to Japan, he has to be one of the youngest from any country. Right. I mean, that's very young.
Exactly.
Generally speaking, early, for an ambassador, he started early. Well, he had on your website, there's an interesting quote. He said, I do believe we can do more to bring the United Nations closer to the world's citizens. How are he and the General Assembly bringing the UN, not only the General Assembly, but probably the whole UN system, closer to the people of the world?
Sure. Well, one way that he does that is he travels throughout the world and meets with people who might not ordinarily meet with international officials, including young environmental activists, including civil society representatives, women's groups. It's very important for him that the General Assembly does not just focus on texts and resolutions and declarations, but actually remembers that it's here to serve the peoples of the world. Another way that he does that is he brings new voices into the General Assembly. He invites, for example, human trafficking survivors to come to address the General Assembly to share their stories. He invites young people. He's going to organize a number of events throughout this session, including one that's all about youth. And he's made it very clear that he just doesn't want to talk about youth. He wants to talk with youth and to hear from them about their ideas for making our world a better place.
Now, every day, Monday through Friday at about 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, you do a press briefing, or you put out some pertinent information about the General Assembly. People can go to un.org to watch that, live streaming on that. Can they sign up to get information from you? Is there some type of way to communicate with them by email?
Sure, absolutely. And if anyone wants to go to our website, which is un.org/PGA/72, they can sign up for our newsletter, basically where we kind of give a summary of my press briefing every day, and we email that out. And that's actually a big thing for us as well, because this president as well, he's all about transparency and making sure that the world knows what we're doing in the General Assembly. So, for example, in the past, there were not always daily press briefings to the press about the General Assembly's work and about the president's work, but we've made sure to do that because we want to be transparent. We want to publish everything online so that the world knows that we are working for them.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, of course, the UN Secretary General's spokesperson he precedes you, giving the update sort of across the whole UN system, and then you focus primarily on the General Assembly.
Yes.
Well, on your website, you have 5 basic issue areas, and I thought we might just go through some of them and see what some of the activities are in each of them, all very critical. The first ones you have is peace. How do you define that broad rubric of peace?
Right. Well, the president feels that peace should underpin everything we do at the UN. It's the UN's reason for being. It's mentioned in our charter. It's why we exist. And sometimes there are other areas that get focused on at the UN and people forget that peace is our central goal here. So. One thing that he's very focused on is conflict prevention and peace building, and to not just focus on military solutions, for example, through peacekeepers, but to actually stop wars before they break out. So this year he's going to be doing a big push about that, about peace building, sustaining peace, and preventing conflict before it breaks out. He's going to have one major high-level meeting in April, but he'll also throughout the year be focusing on this as a theme. The UN has a lot of tools at its disposal when it comes to peace building and conflict prevention, but we need to refocus on them, make sure that we're using them correctly, using the resources that we do have at our disposal to make sure that peace is built and then sustained. He doesn't think it's enough to just intervene in a conflict once it's broken out, and he doesn't think it's good to leave a war zone once a peace agreement has been signed. Support is needed at all stages of a conflict to make sure that everyone can keep living in peace.
And that's so critical with the peace building. And many years, decades ago, it seemed that in so many cases where if there were conflict or something like that, that whoever won would leave the area and just sort of leave it up to the design of the people in that area to sort of dig out from the rubble and to do it. But you have to build that confidence and you have to have that connection.
Yes.
And you mentioned that about peace building, and of course UN has a peace building commission which focuses on that. So that is so vital.
Yes, and we're working very closely with them as well. There's a lot of good expertise here in the UN, including in the Department of Political Affairs, including with our peace building commission colleagues, and we will continue to work closely with them to make sure we're all acting coherently as one UN.
And of course, September 21st, I believe, is the International Day of Peace around the world. It's declared by the UN General Assembly.
Yes.
And many literally tens of thousands of organizations do programs around that day or on that day focusing on peace. And of course, the UN is still the only epicenter of the world, the only international institution that brings all the countries of the world together to hammer out these problems.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the only game in town.
Right. And that's why the president wants to reestablish the UN's preeminence as the world's chief international organization dealing with these issues. And that actually maybe will bring us to the second one of the priorities, which is migration. Now, migration is an area where the president feels the UN should be playing a bigger role. Right now, the member states have agreed that the UN should finalize a global compact on safe, orderly, and regular migration. Because right now, I'm sure you've seen many news reports of migration that's happening in which migrants are not being treated well, or in which it's not working the way that it really should be. To make sure that all people are benefiting from migration. and that we have a common global understanding of migration. Right now, migration is handled in a very national and reactive way, but the president feels it's an urgent test for the UN to have a common global understanding of what migration means and how it can work for all of us. So this is something that he will actually be pushing as well. It's it's been mandated for him to do this during the 72nd session of the General Assembly, and it's a really big test for us at the United Nations to lead the charge in making sure that we are all on the same page when it comes to migration.
Mm-hmm. Would this be done through an international conference, or how would you develop the machinery, the mechanics to do this? Bring all the players of the world together to focus on this problem, to come up with an agreement or a compact or a treaty, or how would that work?
The steps have already started. There have actually been a lot of hearings already with civil society to hear from them about what they think is needed, a lot of talks with governments as well, and a lot of talks with migrants themselves to see what they think that they need to migrate in a safe and orderly and regular fashion. So the work has already started, and the idea is that by around July we'll actually have a finalized global compact, which will be a document that will kind of provide a global understanding of what migration means. It will not challenge state sovereignty. Of course, it'll still be up to countries to determine who enters their country, who crosses their borders. That's always been up to the states. We won't change that, but we do need some sort of common understanding. So after that, after the global compact is finalized in probably around July, the idea would be then to have the countries of the world adopt this compact, to sign on to it, and that would probably happen in December of next year, of this year, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Now, one entity within the United Nations is the Human Rights Council.
Mm-hmm.
They would be involved in this, I'm assuming, is that correct?
Well, the body that's in the lead on this is the General Assembly, and the President of the General Assembly has been tasked to lead this process. And of course, we're consulting widely with a range of UN partners, and one of our big partners is actually the International Organization of Migration, which deals with migrants.
Exactly right, the IOM.
Of course.
Exactly, yes, very important organization. Well, let's focus on, if you look at migrants, or immigrants, shall we say, the vast majority of immigrants really want to stay in their own countries. So often they're climate change refugees, they're driven out because of the conflict in Syria or something like that, but the majority of people want to stay where they are and to build their lives there, do they not?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak for why people move, but the fact is throughout our whole human history, people have always been on the move. Exactly. So regardless of why they do it, it's just happening. So we need to have some sort of common position on it and to make sure that it's working for everybody.
It's very important, yes.
Yes.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you would like to share our programs, please do so. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge as a public service to help people better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at a very important organ of the United Nations, namely the General Assembly, and the role it plays in convening the 193 countries of the world together. My guest today is an expert on this particular group. My guest is Mr. Brenden Varma, who is the spokesperson for the 72nd President of the United Nations General Assembly. Brenden, we've covered we've got three more really important issues to get through here before our time runs out. Let's shift over to Sustainable Planet. That's your third goal, or third issue area. What exactly are we talking about with Sustainable Planet?
Sure. Well, a big part of that is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which all 193 member states of the UN signed on to. Basically, it was great because the governments agreed on a blueprint to achieve sustainable development goals that are very central to our health as a planet by the year 2030. So the President feels that it's very important to maintain momentum on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and these goals cover a wide range of very important topics, from gender equality and women's empowerment to fighting hunger, to tackling climate change, to strengthening peace and security and justice institutions. There are goals that are crucial for our world, and so he will continue to build the momentum to achieve them. And also included in that is, as I mentioned, climate change. It's a very important issue for our time. It's a global phenomenon, but the impacts are always felt very locally. And we've seen a wide range of natural disasters this year, including hurricanes Irma and Maria, that have shown why we need to tackle this important global phenomenon. So he will continue to try to make progress on tackling climate change and promoting sustainable development.
And it seems that there's more and more interest today in dealing with this climate change problem, especially after some of these horrific disasters, these climate change disasters, wildfires, flooding, desertification. Out of the last, I'm guessing at this, 15, 16 years, the last 14 or 15 have been the hottest in recorded history. We're moving up. I mean, we're moving up the scale here, so to speak. So
the science is very clear. We have the science. We know that climate change is happening, and we also know that there are definite relations between climate change and peace and security issues. When you have lakes drying up, resources disappearing, people fight with each other. So we need to anticipate these kinds of conflicts and do what we can to address climate change and then to also maintain peace.
And we see that climate is changing quite dramatically. And there are indigenous people living in the Altiplano in Bolivia their glaciers are disappearing. They're going to run out of water within the next 15 to 20 years. Cape Town, South Africa, by I think it's May or something, April or May of this year, will be without water. I mean, here you've got millions of people living in that area with no water. It is a crisis.
Absolutely. And actually, since you mentioned water, one of the things that the President will do this session is to launch an international decade on water. And that will be 10 years of activism around water to remind the world that water is such a precious resource for all of us and that we need to do what we can to preserve our supplies.
We certainly do. Well, the fourth item that you have, issue area, is human dignity. What is contained in that particular area?
Sure. Well, the President feels that human dignity and human rights need to also underpin everything that we do as an organization. Human rights is one of the central pillars of the United Nations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of the proudest achievements of the international community. The President feels that human rights are not a gift for governments to give. Rights are something that we are all entitled to as human beings. So he wants to make sure that human rights remain at the forefront of everything that the General Assembly does.
And how will he be having sessions on that, or you'll have resolutions pertaining to the support or the protection of human rights, that type of thing, or what will be some of the activities focusing on that?
Sure. Well, the activities have already started. Throughout the main part of the General Assembly, you saw a number of resolutions adopted on human rights issues throughout the world. And we have the third committee within the General Assembly which focuses on human rights. The resolutions that were adopted by the committee were then adopted by the General Assembly plenary, and those, as we talked about earlier, serve as really important reflections of political will of what the world is thinking and feeling, because there's a lot of agreement on the fact that we need to keep human rights at the forefront of everything we do.
And that's one of those areas that so often gets overlooked when wars take place, when you have people who are climate change refugees, when you have migrants who have to flee their homeland for whatever reason, that the first thing that seems to be lost and trampled on is human rights.
Absolutely.
It is something we need to focus more on.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, yeah. Now, the last item deals with a modern United Nations. Are you talking about reform in this, or making the UN more efficient, more effective?
All of
making
that.
It everything
yes,
into the
absolutely,
21st century.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One area when it comes to United Nations reform is reform of the Security Council. And you had mentioned earlier that the two main organs that most people think of when they think of the UN are the General Assembly and the Security Council. Now, the Security Council, it reflects the realities of the 1940s. Actually, all of the membership of the UN agree that the Security Council has to be adapted to reflect the realities of today. And now the process of reforming the Security Council sits firmly with the General Assembly. So we will continue to create the platform for member states to come together and have a credible process that will lead to meaningful progress on Security Council reform. Because if the world doesn't believe in the Security Council, which is the body that's supposed to protect international peace and security, then that affects the credibility of the whole United Nations and of the General Assembly, of course. So this is something that we will be working very hard on this year to try to make progress. And we do need a United Nations that is efficient and effective and can meet the needs of the people of the world.
Now, you've worked in the private sector, you've worked at the UN for the past 15, 16 years, something like that. And you talk to people in New York and around the world about the UN. Do you run in, I'm sure you've talked to people who have a lot of misinformation about the United Nations.
Absolutely.
They think it's a one world government, which it's not.
Yes.
They think it's super rich, which it's not.
Right.
They think it has a standing army, which it doesn't. But do you run into a lot of these myths that are out there and people who promote these myths about the UN?
Absolutely, yeah. And having worked outside the UN before, I know that it's very difficult sometimes to demystify the UN because it is such a big organization with such a long history. And it's important for us as UN communicators to educate the world and to tell them what we do and why we're here. And you're absolutely right. I mean, people think sometimes, well, why does the UN not act faster? Why does it not just go into a country and impose its will? And they don't know that state sovereignty is so central to what the UN is all about. And that we have our ideals and our values, but as you said yourself, we don't have an army. We can't enforce our will whenever we want to. And we really are, the member states are our bosses. Whatever they give us in terms of mandates, in terms of budgets and resources, that's what we have to work with. So we have to work within our means as well. But one thing that I've learned working at the UN is, I was working in Kosovo for a while with the UN, and I had a friend of mine who worked with me there at the UN. And he left the UN to work for a major private sector organization, a big multinational corporation. And after a while, he wanted to leave and he wanted to come back to the UN because he said that at the end of the day, no matter how good that corporation is, his ultimate goal is to make money and to make profits. And we talked about how, for me, I know the UN is not a perfect organization because it's made up of people and people are not perfect. But at the end of the day, the goals of the UN, including women's empowerment, gender equality, human rights, maintenance of international peace and security, sustainable development, these are all goals that I can get behind so that when I go to bed at night, I can at least sleep comfortably knowing that I work for an organization that I believe in.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at the UN, you've looked at the UN General Assembly, 193 different countries that represent 7.4 billion people roughly on the planet. They have every political persuasion, every economic system. They have every moray, folkway that you can imagine. They all come together under one roof, and it's actually amazing that they agree upon as much as they do in the General Assembly. In fact, they agree upon a lot more than perhaps the U.S. Congress or some parliaments around the world who bicker a lot more than the folks here. But they do agree, probably 85, 90% of the resolutions that come up, do they not?
We have seen a major trend of the General Assembly moving from voting on resolutions to achieving consensus. And to achieve consensus, to get all 193 countries to agree on anything is already a big feat, considering that people come from such different cultures and different historical contexts. So it's a beautiful thing to see in the General Assembly when you have all these disparate countries coming together and uniting around common aims and solutions to our problems.
That is so very true. It's extremely right on target. As you look at the General Assembly in the future, what do you see as one or two of the major challenges you're going to be dealing with, and not only for this president, but also as we move forward with the 193 member body of the General Assembly?
Well, I think that there is a concern at the UN that multilateralism is under threat, that there are forces rising in the world that want countries to look inward, and those forces are kind of forgetting that phenomena like climate change, like terrorism, these are phenomena that they don't respect national borders. We need to work together as an international community if we're going to solve them. The General Assembly provides the perfect place for that to happen. So that's something that we will need to also address as communicators to remind the world why the UN is important for solving the world's problems.
Exactly, and it plays a very critical role in doing this. And a lot of people are really shocked, in a good way, not in a bad way, but are shocked when they find out that the UN touches their lives every day. So often people think of the UN peacekeepers, they think of the General Assembly, but when they learn that the UN helps to move aircraft, ships, mail, weather information around the world. If you're watching the 10 o'clock weather report tonight, it's a UN agency, the World Meteorological Organization, that helps move that information to other parts of the world, not only the United States. So the UN does touch our lives every day.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that whether or not you were in Japan or Brazil or India or Belgium, the fact that red means stop in a traffic light or green means go, that's because of standards that were set by the UN. And this helps us communicate as a global population. When you go to buy milk and you see an expiration date there, that's because of standards that came from the UN. The UN is a part of our lives. It touches us in many different ways, and in ways that help us as a global society and to protect our health.
Exactly. And again, our viewers can go to your website, un.org/PGA /72
Yes.
and get more information on what we're talking about. Sign up to get emails from you and that type of thing,
Yes.
and to learn much more about it, because we do need to learn more about not only the General Assembly, but all aspects of the UN, be it the Security Council, the International Court of Justice, Economic and Social Council, the Secretariat, and not to mention all the agencies that are out there on the front lines.
Absolutely.
Many of these people get shot at every day. People forget that. In Syria, that's not a picnic zone. It is far from it. But anyway, Brenden Varma, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.